Professionals and even students often feel pressure to squeeze networking activities into their daily routines. I know I do, and listener, you probably do too. But is daily networking really right for everyone? So I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit of an introverted person. And more than once, if I'm being honest, I've secretly wondered, are all the hours I've been told to spend on like LinkedIn for social media networking and attending in-person events, are these really the best way for me to be spending my time? Maybe you too try to ignore that sneaking suspicion that maybe your networking efforts could be ineffective or could be improved upon. But what if you're right? Hello there, this is Bradley, and you're listening to Psych Everywhere, a podcast by Psi Chi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. For this show, distinguished guests weigh in on applying psychological science to a diverse range of current events and bettering your life. For today's episode, we're going to talk about how networking can sometimes actually go wrong, for some people anyway, and what you can do to ensure that when you do network that you're making the most of your time. With me today, I am really excited to introduce Dr. Judith Volmer, who is joining me via Zoom from Germany. Dr. Volmer is a tenured professor of work and organizational psychology at the University of Bamberg. And guess what? Her research on the consequences of networking, I love that phrase, the consequences of networking. Her research might just cause you to rethink how you go about building relationships with others. Dr. Volmer's research interests include social interactions, leadership, and psychological health prevention at work, as well as sustainable career development and management. I'm looking forward to discussing a couple of her articles about networking in this episode. Dr. Volmer, welcome to Psych Everywhere.
Yeah, hi, Bradley. Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. You know, I've heard so many articles and so many talks over the years about how you need to network all the time. I never heard anyone say, well, maybe you need to slow down and make sure you're doing it right. And so when I came across your research, I was just so excited to have you on the show. Why don't we start with a couple of just little like icebreaker questions? Do you have a LinkedIn profile? Is that popular in Germany?
Yes, I opened it recently, actually. I think it's very useful to have one. Yeah, I was surprised about the benefits.
And what kinds of networking do you like to participate in?
Actually, I like these social media profiles like LinkedIn, and I also like smaller conferences for specific topics where you can meet specific people who are interested in your research area. That's what I like. Yeah, not these huge conferences. I go there also to SIAP, for example, or the Academy of Management conference, but I feel much more comfortable at smaller conferences, yes.
Okay. Well, let's start from sort of a positive angle. What are some benefits of networking, particularly long-term benefits?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's a lot of research about the long-term consequences of networking. Networking is a viable career self-management strategy, and it enhances people's access to resources. There's a myriad of positive long-term outcomes, such as, for example, salary, career satisfaction, promotions, etc. So, as you can see, there are many positive long-term consequences of networking.
In 2018, you and a co-author published an article in Frontiers in Psychology, and I'll put a link in the show notes for this episode so listeners can go find it. It was about short-term effects of networking. Could you tell us sort of how you conducted that and what you found on things like career optimism?
Yeah, sure. I conducted this study together with my colleague Hans-Georg Wolf from the University of Cologne, also in Germany. And we conducted an experience sampling study, a diary study over 5 consecutive working days. In this study published in Frontiers, we acquired 160 academics who filled out questionnaires 1 week in advance. And then they had these diary questionnaires. And we built on conservation of resources theory. We investigated short-term effects of networking on employees' career-related outcomes. That is career optimism, career satisfaction. Then we also looked at job attitudes, operationalized as job satisfaction. And we also looked at well-being in our study, emotional exhaustion. Let me just briefly explain what these constructs mean. Career optimism is, as defined by Rottinghaus, the tendency to expect the best possible outcome or to emphasize the most positive aspects of one's future career development. So a rather optimistic view of one's career. And then we have this career satisfaction, defined as individuals' idiosyncratic evaluations of their careers. Emotional exhaustion is also well known. I assume it's the stress dimension of burnout and includes feelings of being exhausted by the emotional demands of an individual's work. And then we have finally job satisfaction in this study, as defined as an individual's evaluation of his or her job or job facets. And then, this was one of the first study with the short-term focus of networking. As I said earlier, the long-term effects are quite well studied, and mostly the effects are positive. As I said, for example, salaries rising, we have more promotions, higher career satisfaction, etc. But it wasn't at all clear how does it work at a daily level. So that was the most important thing, I would say, in this 2018 study published in Frontiers. And we had this also effective events theory as a theoretical background. And we used daily networking as a daily event. And then we have positive affect as a mediator, and these outcomes that I defined: career optimism, career satisfaction, job satisfaction, and emotional exhaustion as outcomes. And findings from hierarchical linear modeling showed that daily networking was positively related to all 4 outcome variables. Moreover, positive affect mediated 3 of 4 relationships with a marginally significant effect for job satisfaction. So most of our hypotheses could be confirmed. In this study, we have quite a strong support or evidence for this positive daily networking. Yeah, in this study with our 160 academics.
Wow. In 2021, you also first authored a study in the Journal of Career Development, and that one showed some short-term findings for task performance and need for affiliation when performing daily networking. Could you share a little about that one as well?
Yeah, sure. Again, we conducted a diary study over 5 consecutive working days. A typical work week is usually what we ask participants for. And this time we had 59 employees from different industrial sectors in Germany, mainly office workers. We recruited participants using flyers, and we, again, participants first responded to a general online survey, including dispositional networking and motives. After 1 week, participants completed 2 online surveys daily for 5 working days. We collected data on daily networking at the end of each working shift, and data on career optimism and task performance at bedtime. Task performance is here defined as employees' fulfillment of formal requirements, what you usually find in your job offer, what you're supposed to do. It's not contextual work, it's your duty. And again, we were interested in short-term effects of networking. And by doing this, we wanted also to pay more attention to career success as an emergent process. Usually in career research, you have a lot of one-shot measurement, I would say. There are also longitudinal designs, etc. But Here we wanted to see how do daily networking activities also accumulate over one work week. And why is it important? It's important because we think that considering the immediate effects of networking is important, as effects at different levels, so to say, within person and between person effects may differ. And we were interested in knowing whether networking has immediate positive effects and whether it is advisable for individuals and organizations, as you also introduced in this podcast. Moreover, we wanted to investigate whether the positive associations of networking with people's career success are valid in the same way for all individuals. Because I was wondering, is it really true? Is everybody a networker, so to say? And earlier research has mainly focused on how individuals act, think, and feel in a general matter called the trait approach. And we here adopted a motivational perspective and focus on implicit motives. This is also quite interesting. What are implicit motives? Maybe it's not that common in work and organizational psychology, I would say. Implicit motives are defined as generally spontaneous behavioral trends over time because of the pleasure derived from the activity itself. And you can measure motives either implicitly or explicitly. The implicit and explicit motives usually correlate only weakly with each other and predict different behaviors. So it's important to distinguish between implicit and explicit measurement of motives. And here we focused on implicit motives, specifically the affiliation motive, as we believe that not all of our behavior is conscious, and assume that differences in the unconscious affiliation motive may explain why not all people might necessarily benefit from networking in the same way. What does need for affiliation mean? People high in need for affiliation strive to be with other people. So they enjoy being with others at parties, etc., at conferences, applying it to the work context. And we consider the affiliation motive as an important explanation for why networking may not have potential benefits for everyone. And we measured it with the multi-motive grid, it is called. It's a validated pictorial test. It has also been applied in the organizational context before. How does it look like? As an example, participants were presented a picture with a high arousal potential for affiliation. And what does the picture show? It showed two people dancing at a disco. There was the picture. And participants were provided in total with 12 statements representing motivational tendency. One is happy to meet other people for affiliation. And then participants indicated whether these statements fitted the picture. So they got the score 0 for no and the score 1 for yes. And then we calculated the sum score of the statements relevant for the need for affiliation motive. I think this is important because it's not really usual how you measure it. You just present pictures and then you have these specific questions that participants answer. And then in the end, you have a sum score. There are also other ways of measurement with much more coding and interpretation. So we decided to take this test or a measurement. And what we found was quite interesting. In this study, we found that need for affiliation moderated the relationship between daily networking and task performance, as well as the relationship between daily networking and career optimism. So we found that people high in need for affiliation motive benefited especially from networking. these were the ones who really liked to exchange ideas, to ask others for help, to go for a beer after work, etc. And interestingly, and this is also one of the most important findings from this study, is that employees with low need for affiliation showed no change in career optimism due to daily networking, and even tended to report less task performance after days with high networking scores. So this is really interesting, that their performance really suffers after a high level of daily networking at a between person level. This is also important because compared to that general level of networking. So if you do more on Wednesday than you usually do, then when you're a person with a low need for affiliation, your task performance suffers. And this is quite interesting that, it's obviously not for everyone, this networking activity. Our implications are that networking is a double-edged sword, and networking should be recommended. I would not say, well, we should not network, but with restrictions. So I would say that people with no need for affiliation should not force themselves to engage in networking activities. Instead, they should try to get job-related, career-related information from alternative sources.
So we found some pretty great long-term benefits, but not always great short-term benefits for people. Mm-hmm. Knowing that, do you think it's possible for a person to know if they have a high or low need for affiliation? Is that something that you think they can determine themselves?
Yeah, there are some ways to measure it. Yeah, at least if you're a psychologist, I don't know how it is in the US, you have to show some certificate that it's possible for you to interpret the results, and then you could do this. Yeah.
Because I know everyone kind of imagines themselves being a little introverted or shy at times. So it's like, can you tell for yourself? A week or so ago, we spoke, and you mentioned, I think it was another study in Germany, and then I think there was even another in China. Would you like to talk about those a little bit as well?
Yeah, sure. This is also interesting because we looked at cross-cultural differences. As you already said, we had a study, the same questions in Germany and in China. And we found that intra-organizational networking, that is, within your organization, and networking includes building networks, maintaining networks, and using contacts. And this is something that's also important because you cannot immediately use your networks. It takes time to build them. But so these intra-organizational networks were especially important in China, but not extra-organizational networking behaviors. The outcomes here were salary and promotions. And in the German group, a largely opposite pattern was found. So the relative importance of building and of using internal contacts was significantly greater in China than in Germany. And if you want to read the paper, it has been published in the Journal of Career Assessment 2018. It's quite interesting to see this different importance of intra and extra organizational networking for different cultures. Of course, this is one study, and they were working for the same company. So it was, to a certain extent, it was standardized, the work environment, etc. But it would be interesting to replicate these findings. But it makes sense in collectivistic cultures. I would say it's more important to have a strong network within your organization, and you're not reaching out for contacts from other organizations. Probably it happens as well. There's, of course, no zero extra organizational networking, but the importance differs.
Well, I know when I first kind of heard your research, I was surprised by it. I'd never heard that angle taken. I wondered, how did you become interested in this area of research?
Yeah, so it's more or less like you said in the beginning, everybody is thinking a little bit about networking and whether you are good or a bad networker to a certain degree, I would say. And everybody also in academia encourages you to do a lot of networking. And I was talking to my colleague, Hans-Georg Wolf, from the University of Cologne after a talk. He's doing also a lot of networking research. And I said to him, do you think that networking can also have negative consequences? So I was really, really interested in finding some negative outcomes, in fact, because, I also thought it's quite time consuming, it's resource consuming. And if you go out, for example, to after work networking activities, etc., it also takes time from other life domains, I would say. So maybe it's not only beneficial, but you might be more exhausted, and not all contacts are necessarily positive, I would say, if you go out. So I was talking to him, and then we were planning this 2018 study about the short-term effects, where we found positive effects again. And then I said, well, but there must be something else. We should dive deeper into this. And maybe the motive structure is different. And of course, the affiliation motive is not the only motive. So you could also do more research, for example, regarding power motive differences. For example, well, we thought that the affiliation motive is particularly interesting for networking behavior. That's why we chose this one. But in my daily life, I'm always wondering, how should networking be done? What's necessary? What's useful, etc. In my teaching, we do this social panorama exercise. You probably know it. It's very simple. So you ask yourself, for example, who's standing next to you? So who has similar interests? And then you ask, who supports you? So who's standing behind of you? Who's standing in front of you? Who wants something from you? Who's asking for advice, etc. And then you ask, who's missing? So whom do you like to know, and how do you get there? And it's a very simple task. It takes half an hour, all in all. And it's always very enlightening, I would say, because usually you don't really think about your network. You don't really put all the people into circles, who's very close to you, who's more distant, etc. And I would recommend doing this exercise. It's quite helpful. And it's also interesting to see how it changes over time. It makes you more active, I would say, in networking. I'm also often asked by my students, isn't it too strategic? Am I using my friends if I see them as a network? But I would say that it's also an exchange. And the first step always should be that you take an active role, that you exchange information, that you offer help, etc. And then your network develops and you get more back in the end than you thought.
Well, I love that activity idea. Do you have any other activities or experiences that you would encourage people to try?
Yeah. So as I said already, I would really recommend start yourself taking a more active role. Often, if we go outside, we stay in our comfort zone. This is what we really like as human beings. And we go with our colleagues that we like, for example, to conferences. And then we sit there and we're not really reaching out for other people. And I would really recommend connect with people you don't know already. So go to them, introduce yourself, listen to other people. That's also very important, that you're not just talking, but that you're listening to what others say. Offer help to others, and also ask people that you know to make introductions to people they know. So use your network and ask people to introduce yourself to others. And this, of course, you need a network that is quite powerful in this case. Maybe it's not always helpful, but Another way might be to reflect on the question of whom you would like to know better and who would be interesting for you, and then to think about through whom you could get access. It might be that you could enroll for volunteer positions or also at conferences. There are also these emails asking for volunteers. And then I would also say that chance events are also very important. So you cannot really plan everything. This is also something I would say if we are talking about careers, career plans. There are also career shocks, like positive and negative career shocks. Positive would be getting a promotion you would not have expected, or getting in contact with somebody who helps you, who supports you without actively having approached this person, etc. So this is something that's actually missing right now during our pandemic, that we can't go to conferences, just hang around, just sit there. I've made really many accidental contacts, I have to say. So when I just had a coffee at a conference or stood in line for checking in, checking out, having breakfast, whatever. And then suddenly you talk to this person and realize that this is quite interesting. And this is something, I would also recommend just be open and just try to have, not this merely strategic focus. It should be fun also. That's also very important. Otherwise, I'm convinced it won't work. Another question is also how large should a network be? I mean, it's difficult to answer, but if you look at other research domains, for example, creativity research, the question resembles me of the strength of weak ties perspective on creativity. There's a 2010 Journal of Applied Psychology, JAP paper from Markus Beer. He's originally from Germany, but he's working now in the US. He found that developing a dozen or so ties to acquaintances and distant colleagues all across the organization with whom one meets monthly, not very often, just occasionally, helps build an idea network. So in this case, the outcome was creativity, but it could also be interesting for networking. And if you look at other disciplines, for example, also business administration, they also have these social network pattern analysis, etc. And they look at the weak and strong ties, etc. And it's always good to have also some weak ties, because if you only meet with people you already know, you won't get any new information. It's a little bit like groupthink. And also in social media, if you only have your bubble, it's impossible to gain new knowledge.
I imagine that people who don't appreciate networking or don't see a need for it, they might not say it, but internally, they kind of turn it off, depending on whether they're actively looking for a job or looking to advance. Mm-hmm. And I imagine you wouldn't encourage that.
Yeah.
So do you have any tips for people specifically who don't like or appreciate networking that might help them to stay on track?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit difficult because it's to a certain degree you should engage in networking. And I think nowadays it's easier because you have these social media options that you haven't had a couple of years ago. But from an organizational perspective, I would say that organizations and leaders should think about different incentive structures for employees, because not everyone likes to be with other people, to go to networking events, etc. So maybe one could set goals for oneself, and also organizations or leaders could do for their employees, for the number of monthly networking activities. It sounds a little bit boring. I would say like having an Excel sheet or something, but it's like writing in academia. If you don't do it regularly, you won't have much progress. So if you write 2 hours per day, for example, you're quite successful in being productive. And maybe one could apply this to networking behavior, that you set yourself goals and that you reflect on the past. What did you enjoy? What did you like? Because I think everything that is not fun for you or that feels extremely uncomfortable would not be successful in the short and also in the long run. And so I would recommend determining for yourself what makes you happy somehow, because as we found in our paper published in 2019, or it was first published online, and then it has been published in 2021. It takes some time sometimes in the Journal of Career Development, where we find inter-individual differences, and I think it's okay to be a little bit reluctant to engaging in all networking activities if it's not fitting your motive structure or personality structure, if it doesn't feel good. So I wouldn't set the goals too high. Like when you're planning to exercise, you shouldn't set a goal 5 times a week, but once a week will be better than 0 times a week. And maybe the same for networking. Start slowly and then you'll get better. You gain experiences. Maybe you have fun.
Well, I can't thank you enough for talking about these things today. I think that this is going to really cause a lot of people to pause and reconsider how they're networking and what they're getting out of it and what they could. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you again for inviting me, and hopefully the topic networking gets further research and practical interest. And if there are any further questions, people can contact me, of course.
You've just listened to another episode of Psych Everywhere. If you are feeling reinvigorated about networking, might I suggest attending one of 6 regional conventions with Psi Chi. At each of these events, Psi Chi hosts an exhibit booth and puts on special programming such as, sessions to help attendees apply to graduate school and learn about diversity issues and even make the most of their convention attendance. I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can view the specific dates and programs for those events. Or maybe in-person events don't sound quite right for you and your schedule this spring. In that case, you're always welcome to follow Psi Chi on social media or read educational articles on the website at your own pace. After listening to today's episode, maybe you feel that you just need to take some time to care for yourself. A nice nap or a TV episode might be in order, and that's perfectly fine too. I just want you to know Psi Chi will be here whenever you're ready and whenever you need a helping hand. Last but not least, if you haven't already subscribed to Psych Everywhere, go ahead and follow us wherever you're listening to podcasts. Tell a friend or a colleague about the show. As you know, word of mouth is a huge help for podcasts. So share what you learned in line at the grocery store or in your classes. You can also follow us on Twitter at Psi Chi Podcast and leave a review at Apple Podcast or wherever you go for podcasts. You'll absolutely make my day. And more importantly, you'll be helping us to get Psych everywhere. Okay, that's all for now. I'll connect with you again soon. Copyright 2022, Psi Chi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.